Hello. What kind of mother tucks in her daughter, kisses her goodnight, then poisons her breakfast the next morning? In the summer of 2022, a quiet home in Tucson, Arizona, went up in flames, leaving 5 family members dead and an entire state paralyzed with fear. No forced entry, no screams, no warning, just ashes and questions. Was this a robbery gone wrong, a cult ritual, or something far colder, hidden behind the walls of a seemingly perfect home? Because the deeper investigators dug, the more one terrifying truth emerged. This wasn't an accident. It was architecture, a plan so quiet, no one heard it coming. And what if I told you? This story doesn't begin with blood, but with silence. 5 bodies burned beyond recognition. No forced entry, no alarm, no screams, just silence, smoke, and death. How can an entire family vanish in flames without a single neighbor hearing a thing? It started just before dawn, on August 14th, 2022, in a quiet cul-de-sac on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona. A 911 call came in at 5:12 a.m., reported house fire, heavy smoke, possible people trapped inside. By the time firefighters arrived at 5:26, the 2-story home was engulfed. The blaze was too clean, too fast. When the flames were finally subdued, investigators stepped into a scene from hell. Charred walls, melted fixtures, and then what was left of 5 human bodies, sprawled across different rooms. An elderly couple, a middle-aged man, and a woman, a child, burned, blackened, unrecognizable. At first glance, it looked like an electrical fire, a tragic accident. But there were no smoke alarms, no signs of struggle, and oddly, no attempts at escape. The victims hadn't even moved from where they lay, like they were already dead before the fire ever started. Homicide was not the first theory. But then came the first autopsy report. Hours later, trace amounts of thallium in the bloodstream, a poison. Quiet, odorless, rare. The elderly male had enough to kill 2 adults. The child had vomited in her throat. Suddenly, this wasn't a fire scene. It was a crime scene, a mass murder. 5 people executed inside their own home. The killer using silence, timing, and fire to erase the evidence. Who would do this? And more importantly, who would gain from wiping out an entire bloodline in a single night? Tucson didn't sleep that night. By morning, news of the fire had spread across Arizona like smoke in the desert. 5 dead, 1 house, no suspects, no motive. People whispered about it in grocery store aisles. Teachers discussed it in hushed tones between classes. Neighbors locked their doors in daylight. The Martinez family wasn't rich. They weren't involved in crime. They were normal, too normal. Manuel Martinez was a retired postal worker. His wife, Rosa, ran a church knitting group. Their son, Diego, managed a car rental branch. His wife, Isabel, worked part-time at a dental clinic. Their daughter, little Sophia, had just started kindergarten. There was no history of domestic violence, no restraining orders, no calls to 911 before the fire. Just silence, but the kind that grows heavier the longer it's ignored. On local radio, callers speculated a gas leak, a murder-suicide, a cartel message. But detectives weren't saying a word. What they did confirm, however, was chilling. None of the 5 victims had any burns in their lungs, meaning they were dead before the flames ever touched them, which meant the fire was a cover-up, which meant someone planned it, and someone watched it happen. But who and why now? The last family photo, taken just 2 weeks earlier, showed everyone smiling at a 4th of July barbecue. Nothing in the picture hinted that less than a month later, they'd all be dead. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood. No witnesses, no strange cars, no forced entry, nothing stolen. But then came something small, almost too small to matter. A neighbor 3 houses down said she heard the family dog barking non-stop between 3:30 and 4 a.m. Then suddenly, nothing. No bark, no whine, just silence. Investigators returned to the scene. In the backyard, beneath a melted plastic slide, they found the dog's body. No signs of trauma, but his water bowl tested positive for traces of thallium. The killer had silenced everything, even the dog. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. This was slow, methodical, intimate. Someone who had been in that house before. Someone who had been trusted, and someone who now was nowhere to be found. 3 days after the fire, the autopsy reports confirmed what detectives feared most. Every victim had been poisoned before the fire started. Not with pills, not with alcohol, with thallium nitrate, a rare, highly toxic substance. Odorless, tasteless, nearly undetectable. It doesn't kill fast. It kills quietly, over hours, sometimes days. Enough time for the killer to sit across the table and watch them eat. By now, the community had moved past shock and into fear. The funeral was scheduled for August 20th. Closed casket, 5 urns, 1 family, and 1 person who showed up alone, without tears, and without warning. Isabel Moreno, Diego's wife, the only surviving member of the household. She stood at the edge of the service, dressed in black, her hands clenched tight. When her name was called, she stepped forward to speak, but said nothing, just looked at the 5 photographs and walked away. She didn't cry, didn't shake. And as the guests wept in confusion and pain, Isabel disappeared before the service ended. That was the first red flag. The second came when detectives checked her alibi. She had claimed she was in Phoenix, visiting her sick mother the night of the fire. But the story had holes. GPS data from her 2013 Toyota Corolla showed she left Phoenix at 11:42 p.m., 4 hours before the fire, and returned at 6:17 a.m., just minutes after firefighters had put out the blaze. That drive was impossible to ignore. When asked, Isabel said she couldn't sleep and needed air, alone, at midnight, on a desert highway, with no calls, no messages, no receipts, just silence. Then came the third red flag. Security footage from a neighbor's Ring camera. Time-stamped 3:47 a.m. A figure, medium height, black hoodie, moving along the side of the Martinez home, not breaking in, slipping in. Through the side gate, no sound, no light. A few minutes later, the same figure was leaving, a shadow inside a shadow. Facial recognition software couldn't confirm the identity, but the timing lined up too perfectly. Police questioned Isabel again. Her voice was calm, her tone was flat. She denied everything, said she never left her mother's house, said the GPS was glitchy. The camera must have been hacked, that someone was framing her. But when asked why she didn't cry at the funeral, her response froze the room. "I've been crying for years, just not where anyone could see it." Suddenly, the investigation split into two. One path led to a woman drowning in grief, the other to a woman with something to hide, a widow, or a liar, a victim, or a planner. Either way, detectives realized something terrifying. If Isabel was involved, she hadn't done it alone. Someone else had helped her, someone who knew how to poison, how to burn, and how to vanish. The double shadow wasn't just a metaphor. There really was a second figure, and they were still out there. On August 22nd, 8 days after the fire, Detectives received the lab results on the dog's food and the leftover casserole found inside the Martinez kitchen. Both tested positive for thallium. This wasn't one dose. It was multiple. Someone had been poisoning the entire family slowly, likely over days, maybe weeks. Enough time for symptoms to look like food poisoning, or migraines, or fatigue. The fire wasn't an act of rage. It was cleanup, professional, emotionless, cold. But a mistake had been made inside the burnt remains of the dishwasher. Forensics recovered a single melted measuring spoon with faint residue. That spoon didn't belong to the kitchen set. It was plastic, white, stamped RX only, a medical-grade dosing spoon used in certain clinics. Detectives turned back to Isabel's workplace. She hadn't been there in weeks, officially on leave, but her access badge had been used on August 9th, 5 days before the murders, around 1:03 a.m. Security footage showed her entering through the side door of Tucson Dental Associates, wearing gloves. She didn't take anything obvious. Just walked to the back cabinet where the sedation drawer was kept. That drawer contained trace compounds used in oral surgery. Small amounts of thallium nitrate for nerve diagnostics. She signed out nothing, left no notes. She was inside for exactly 12 minutes, then gone. That footage never made it to the clinic manager. It was stored, archived, and forgotten. But now it screamed one thing: intent. And then came the burner phone, found by accident, during a sweep of Isabel's home in Phoenix, hidden behind a loose vent in the hallway, cracked screen, no SIM card, but data recovery pulled fragments, encrypted messages, all deleted, except one, sent 10 days before the fire, a single line. "You do your part. I'll handle the cleanup. No contact name, no trace, but a digital ghost that made everything feel colder." Isabel wasn't working alone. Someone coached her. Someone erased tracks. Someone burned the bodies. When asked about the phone, Isabel denied ever seeing it. But then detectives noticed something else. On the back of the burner phone was a partial fingerprint. Not Isabel's. Not any family members. A male. Unknown. Now there were two ghosts in the story. One in front of them, one behind, and the air around the case began to rot. This wasn't just about resentment or a bad marriage. This was designed geometry, a perfect angle of death, and somewhere inside it all was someone watching them work, a presence they couldn't name. Not yet, but already. Tucson PD had changed the name of the case file, from Martinez House Fire to something else. Operation Widow's Web, because something far more tangled was about to surface. August 25th, 11 days since the fire, and everything changed in 7 seconds. That's how long it took to open the trunk. The Phoenix Police Department, executing a secondary warrant at Isabel's mother's home, opened the garage and located Isabel's vehicle, a red 2013 Toyota Corolla she had driven the night of the murders. Officers noticed something odd, a faint chemical odor, something synthetic, cold. The trunk had been scrubbed clean. Bleach, vinegar, industrial wipes, but under UV light. The floor lit up blue, streaks, drops, one long smear. Crime scene techs peeled back the fabric liner and found it, wedged beneath the spare tire, an old half-burned laptop, charred on one edge, battery dead. But inside, data, a file folder named Purity, password protected. The cyber forensics team cracked it in less than 5 hours, and what they found blew the investigation wide open. Inside were over 200 documents, schedules, grocery receipts, surveillance screenshots, floor plans. One spreadsheet was titled Meal Dosing Plan. It listed the names of each Martinez family member, dates, doses, observed symptoms, mild nausea, fatigue, loose stool, and then a chilling line, typed in all caps. Test 5 lethal threshold. Confirmed, but that wasn't the worst. There were notes, personal, chilling, brutal, written like diary entries. She told me to wear beige, like I'm a child. I'll never be free unless they all disappear. He touches my back like I owe him my skin. Sophia cried when I said no ice cream. She'll cry once. That's mercy. And then the final entry, dated just 24 hours before the fire. After tomorrow, I will never be someone's daughter-in-law again. That night, Isabel was taken into custody. No cuffs, no fight. Just a stillness in her face that chilled every officer in the room. She didn't ask why, didn't demand a lawyer. She just whispered one sentence. Did you find the folder? No one spoke. The next morning, the news broke. Every local station in Arizona carried the headline, "Widow suspected in family massacre." The phones at Tucson PD lit up. Tips, rumors, death threats. One call came from a blocked number, male voice, distorted. She didn't burn it all. Check the motel on Oracle Road. Detectives traced the tip to a run-down motel, 10 miles from the Martinez house. Room 206. Paid in cash. Registered under the name Eva Moreno. Isabel's birth name. Inside, hidden in the air vent, was a small duffel bag. Inside that, one disposable phone, one black hoodie, one pair of gloves, and a USB drive labeled backup. The drive contained something they hadn't seen before. Surveillance footage, not from the Martinez house, but from the inside of their kitchen. A small camera had been hidden inside a spice cabinet. The footage showed a figure pouring something into a pot. Calm, robotic, wearing gloves, hoodie, face blurred. But the body language matched Isabel's exactly. The timestamp. 3 nights before the fire. Detectives realized what they were seeing wasn't an accident. It wasn't a rush job. It was a documentary about murder. Curated, planned, cataloged. Someone had turned death into a ritual and left behind a trail, not just to be discovered, but to be understood. And somewhere, buried in all of it, was still one unanswered question. If Isabel did all this, who was she filming it for? By August 29th, Isabel was officially charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, arson, tampering with evidence, and possession of toxic agents. But that wasn't enough. Detectives didn't want a conviction. They wanted a blueprint, because everything about this case screamed engineering, not impulse, not passion, but precision. A poison plan scripted down to the hour, a house set to burn exactly 4 hours after the victim's final dose. A phone wiped clean, a trunk bleached, a camera is placed inside the kitchen. They needed to know why. So they started reconstructing the timeline, layer by layer, using purchase histories, GPS logs, security footage, and data from the recovered laptop. They built Isabel's movements in the months before the murders. The first red flag in June. She searched for undetectable poisons used in Soviet assassinations. A week later, she ordered supplements from a sketchy website registered in Belarus. The package arrived on July 2nd. Customs didn't flag it. Inside, plant compounds, herbal agents, and a small bottle labeled in Russian. It translated to purity. By mid-July, Isabel had already begun poisoning her in-laws, not to kill immediately, to weaken, to study. The casserole they ate on July 17th caused light stomach cramps. Isabel recorded it in her notes as mild setback. 2 days later, she switched from food to coffee. The entire family shared the same French press every morning. She did it once, logged it, waited. By August 3rd, Rosa Martinez was too weak to attend her knitting group. Diego left work early twice with migraines. Even Sofia began sleeping more. Isabel called it optimal decline. Detectives interviewed Isabel's co-workers. One remembered her asking about sedatives for anxiety. Another recalled Isabel once asked if nerve agents could be absorbed through the skin. She said it was for a novel she was writing. No one reported it, but the breadcrumbs kept piling up. Forensics found a discarded vial under the floorboards of the Martinez home's guest room. A trace of thallium nitrate remained, just enough to match the dental clinic's inventory. Isabel had stolen it in small doses, micrograms at a time, over 6 months. Too little to notice, but enough to kill 5 people. Then came the final breakthrough, an analysis of the fire's origin. The burn patterns showed an accelerant was used, benzene, most likely from a can of industrial solvent. Traces were found in the garage. A digital receipt showed Isabel purchased it from a hardware store in Nogales. Paid in cash, no ID. The timestamp, August 13th, less than 24 hours before the fire. The plan was almost perfect, but not perfect enough. And yet one question still rattled every detective on the task force. Why hide the camera? Why record your own crime? The answer came not from evidence, but from a voice. The USB backup contained a short video file, just audio, no images, 32 seconds long. Isabel's voice, whispering, alone, almost like a prayer. They made me small. They made me quiet. So I watched. I studied. I learned how to disappear. And now, they can never touch me again. It wasn't just about murder. It was about reclaiming power. And somewhere inside her twisted sense of justice, Isabel believed she had already won. But the task force wasn't done, because the data didn't just expose her. It pointed to something worse, a pattern. A second account logged into the laptop, a hidden user, same folder access, same timestamps, different IP address, logged in remotely. Someone else had been watching the plan unfold in real time, and they hadn't left a single fingerprint. September 2nd, 18 days since the fire. Isabel was in custody. But detectives knew they were still missing something. She didn't act alone. The laptop logs didn't lie. There was a second presence. Someone who didn't appear in the footage, didn't show up in the house, but was always there. Watching, monitoring, guiding. The second user profile, hidden under the alias Orpheus, had logged in 6 times in the days leading up to the murders. All remote, all encrypted. The IP was traced to a private server rented out in Las Cruces, New Mexico, a shell company. No name, no payment trail. But then came the slip. One login happened at 2:16 a.m. on August 14th, less than 3 hours before the fire. This time, the IP wasn't masked, a local connection. A cafe Wi-Fi network was used by just 3 customers that night. One of them, Marcus Leclerc, a name that, on the surface, meant nothing. No criminal record, no connections to the Martinez family, no social media. But when they pulled his background, the shadows came flooding in. Marcus Leclerc, 39, former Army Signal Intelligence, discharged in 2015 under psychological review, moved to Tucson in 2017. Worked sporadically as a freelance coder, lived alone, cash renter, no digital trail, except one in 2020. He checked into the same dental clinic where Isabel had started working months earlier, a root canal, no medical notes after. But Isabel's schedule showed she worked the front desk that day. No direct contact, or so it seemed, by the time detectives reached his listed address. The apartment was empty. No signs of struggle, but not abandoned. Erased. Walls scrubbed. Devices missing. The router burned. Trash incinerated in the kitchen sink. One clue remained. A thumb drive taped behind the bathroom mirror. Inside, files, encrypted. But one document, unprotected, had a single sentence. She was the match. I just drew the line. The hunt was on. The FBI got involved. They flagged Marcus's passport, his credit history. Cameras across the Southwest were fed his photo. The breakthrough came from a roadside diner in Sierra Blanca, Texas. Marcus had paid cash for gas and eggs. But he left behind a receipt and a fingerprint. Within 6 hours, they traced him to a Greyhound bus headed toward Louisiana. The bus was intercepted outside El Paso. Marcus wasn't on it, but the ticket had been used, switched at a rest stop, a decoy. Now it was psychological, tactical. This wasn't a fugitive running scared. This was a ghost trained to disappear, but ghosts still cast shadows. And then, on September 7th, the silence cracked. A call came in to the FBI's Tucson field office. No voice, just a single ping. Coordinates, remote desert. The border of Arizona and New Mexico, near an abandoned radar outpost. When agents arrived, they found a makeshift shelter, military-grade tarp, solar panels, dehydrated food, and inside, seated calmly on a rusted folding chair, was Marcus Leclerc. He didn't run, didn't fight, just looked up and said, "Did she talk about me?" They cuffed him, quietly. He never asked for a lawyer, never denied his role, only smiled once when they showed him a photo of the Martinez house before the fire. His voice is barely audible. That's where it started. That's where she was born. The interrogation lasted 14 hours. He spoke in riddles, called Isabel a phoenix in a cage, referred to himself as a mirror, said he never touched anyone, only designed the plan, said she came to him with anger, and he gave it shape. She was ready to kill. He said, "I just gave her permission." And when they asked why poison, why fire, why the child, he didn't flinch. Because mercy is a lie, and obedience is a slow death. They had him, but the truth still didn't feel like justice. Because Marcus never raised a hand, never stepped inside the house. But he had written the script, line by line, and Isabel had followed it to the letter. September 9th. Isabel finally spoke. Not in a courtroom, not in front of a jury, but alone, in a gray interview room at the Pima County Detention Center. No lawyer, no press, just 2 detectives, 1 recorder, and 5 hours of silence before she began. When she did, her voice was calm, cold, flat like concrete. She didn't stutter, didn't pause. Every word came out like it had already been rehearsed. Because it had. It didn't start with poison. It started with control. She said it plainly, like describing the weather. She talked about Rosa, her mother-in-law, correcting the way she folded towels, the way she cut onions, the way she held her daughter's hand, about Diego, her husband, keeping a second phone, sleeping on the couch, telling her she was too emotional to work full-time, about the house rules, no wine, no TV after 9, no locking doors, no therapy. I stopped being a person. I became their helper, their shame, their breathing statue. Then she talked about Marcus, how she met him online in a trauma recovery forum under an anonymous name, how he replied to her posts, how he never asked about her family, only about her thoughts, how he introduced her to the idea of ethical removal. He never told her to do it, just asked her what freedom would feel like. He didn't convince me. He reflected me. I was already dying in that house. I just picked the date I'd stop pretending. She admitted to everything. The food, the dosage logs, the fire, the camera. She said the camera wasn't to document the crime. It was to witness her reclaiming her life. She wanted someone to see it, to understand it, not the killing, the silence before it. When they asked why she killed Sophia, her daughter, her voice cracked once, just once, because they would have taken her, molded her, broken her like they broke me. I gave her peace before they could give her fear. Detectives froze. That line would replay in their heads for months. She called the plan sacred, said it was never about revenge. It was about purity, clean lines, clean death. She said fire was not to destroy, but to free. Ashes don't judge. When they showed her a photo of Marcus in custody, her face didn't change. She said he never touched her, never met her in person. He was just the voice that reminded her she had a choice. And when asked if she felt remorse, she said one sentence: "Remorse is a luxury for people who were ever given a choice." By the time the confession ended, no one in the room could speak. The detectives turned off the recorder. Isabel sat still, hands folded. The quiet hung in the air like smoke that never left. It wasn't just a confession, it was a manifesto. And for the first time since the fire, they understood something terrifying. Isabel didn't just want to escape, she wanted erasure. By September 12th, the story had swallowed the country. News anchors choked on every detail. Podcasts broke it down minute by minute. The widow's web was no longer a case. It was a movement. Some called her a monster. Some called her a martyr. In Tucson, grief turned toxic. Memorials outside the Martinez home were torn down, rebuilt, then burned again. One side left flowers. The other left signs monster behind the smile. Feminism doesn't justify murder. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended for weeks. One woman posted a TikTok reenacting Isabel's final monologue. It got 2.4 million views. Another wrote a ballad called "Ashes Don't Judge," played on college radios from Oregon to Maine. But on the ground, nothing felt poetic. At the funeral for the Martinez family, held a second time to avoid protesters, police escorted guests into the church. Rosa's sister fainted at the altar. Diego's cousin had to be restrained for screaming. "You let a snake into our bloodline." Outside, a crowd had gathered. Some carried signs of support, others, signs demanding death. Isabel had divided a nation without saying a word in court. And every time the footage leaked, the kitchen video, the audio clip, the confession, the internet splintered deeper. Some said Isabel was the product of a system that feeds off obedience, that she was a symptom, not a cause, a reflection of centuries of silenced rage. Others called her a narcissist with a god complex, a coward who poisoned a 5-year-old to make a point. Then came the books, the think pieces, the college lectures. Panels debated whether Isabel should be studied or buried. But not everyone was debating. Sophia's kindergarten teacher resigned, said she couldn't look at the empty desk anymore. Diego's best friend moved out of state, said the air in Tucson smelled like ghosts. Even some of the officers who worked the scene never came back. One detective quit on the spot, said no case had ever made him feel dirtier. And Marcus, though silent now, had his own cult following. Men who called him the architect. Forums that traded in plans, documents, and templates. Some tried to copy what he did. At least 2 arrests were made. It wasn't just about a family murdered in the night. It was about the ripple, the infection, the fact that one woman's cold, clinical war on her own bloodline had opened a door, and nobody could close it again. This wasn't healing. This was fallout, and Tucson forgot how to sleep. November 3rd, 2024. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Isabel Moreno, guilty on all counts. 5 murders, 1 conspiracy, 1 life erased to build another. She showed no emotion, no tears, no flinch. Just that same stillness she carried since the day of her arrest. The judge sentenced her to life, without parole. 5 consecutive terms, plus 50 years for conspiracy and destruction of evidence. Marcus Leclerc received a lesser sentence, 25 years for criminal facilitation and digital conspiracy. No one in the courtroom spoke his name. Rosa's sister sobbed so hard she collapsed. Diego's father, too weak to attend, watched the live stream from a hospice bed. The final gavel dropped at 11:17 a.m., and just like that, it was over, on paper. But outside, nothing was over, because what Isabel left behind was bigger than evidence, bigger than the verdict. She left a blueprint, a language, a chilling reminder that horror doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it wears a quiet smile. Sometimes, it cooks dinner, packs lunch, tucks a child into bed, and dreams of fire. In her final statement, Isabel declined to speak, but reporters later uncovered a handwritten note from her prison cell. Just one line. Cages come in many forms. I simply chose mine. Since the trial, Tucson has tried to forget. The Martinez house was bulldozed. The lot remains empty, overgrown. The city offered to turn it into a memorial park. No one agreed. People crossed the street to avoid walking past. Children say it's haunted. Adults say nothing at all. True crime shows fight for interview rights. Publishing houses send offers. Lawyers argue over profit shares. But there's no peace, no closure. Because the question still lingers. How long does a person have to be invisible before they become a ghost with a pulse? And what happens when that ghost learns how to burn? The story ends with ash, but the silence it left behind, that's still burning. Justice doesn't erase evil. It only documents the day it became official. The law delivered its sentence. The bodies were buried. The house was erased. But no courtroom can convict the years of control. No prison can hold the echoes of a child who never got to grow up. And no fire, no matter how hot, can burn away what in the end. Isabel Moreno became the villain of a nation. But to her, she was never the monster, just the match that lit the way. And maybe that's the part that, not that one woman destroyed, but that she believed it was the only way to survive them.